It's very good at reflecting back at whatever the other person wants. So the beauty, the actual painful, paradoxical beauty of interacting with another human being is its kind of total unpredictability, and that you can't know what the other person is going to say.
In a human-to-human relationship, how much is what a patient perceives is actually a projection in their own mind, and how much does it really reflect something that really is going on between two embodied entities? And there's a lot of debate on that.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust and is focused on the beauty and burdens of innovation. Hey everybody, we are living through a moment in which some of the most fundamental questions about being human are being reopened, not just by philosophers, but by the technologies and institutions that increasingly mediate our relationships. As automation and AI and new forms of standardization reshape so much of our lives, we're pushed to ask, what forms of connection must never be outsourced to technology? And what happens to dignity and belonging and recognition when relational work becomes scripted and quantified and even displaced by better-than-nothing technological solutions? These concerns are increasingly touching a range of professions: teachers, therapists, chaplains, physicians, care workers, and really anyone whose work relies on genuine human presence. And they involve decisions being made right now about the future of work. My guests today offer two of the most compelling vantage points on these questions. Allison Pugh is Professor of Sociology at Johns Hopkins University and is the author of The Last Human Job, winner of the 2025 Best Book Award at the American Sociological Association. Her work shows how the pressures of automation and quantification and efficiency undermine what she calls connective labor, the profoundly human work of seeing another person and reflecting that seeing and that understanding back to them. Louis Kim spent decades leading innovation at Hewlett-Packard, most recently as vice president, and he now finds himself on a very different career path, preparing for work in hospice and palliative care. In parallel, he helps lead Vatican-sponsored conversations on principled AI in healthcare. In our conversation, we explore the fragile but essential space where technology meets connection. We ask where AI and new technologies can assist, what they distort, and what forms of encounter remain uniquely human. Let's get started. Hey, Allison. Hey, Louis. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. It's really such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, Allison.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, Louis.
Great. Well, I thought this would be a really wonderful occasion to have a conversation on the relation between technology and connection. And the season of the podcast is focused on the beauty and burdens of innovation. And we're looking at a lot of innovations that are happening in relation to how we connect with each other, how we relate to each other. So that's one of the reasons I thought of bringing you both together and into this conversation. But before we go there, I want to ask you, as I do with all my podcast guests, to share a memory of profound beauty from your childhoods or your early lives that remains with you till today. It doesn't have to do with connection and relationship. It could, but any memory that comes to your minds. And perhaps, Louis, I'll start with you, and then Allison.
Photography. So my dad gave me a camera, I guess, in third grade. And then later I read books in photography, and there's still images I remember from those books. And I'm a photographer to this day. So,
do you have a particular image that stays with you, or a memory of taking a particular kind of photograph?
Yeah, there's a particular image in one of the books that was very geometrical. And the lesson of the book was that we stop seeing as adults. As children, we just see light and we don't attach labels and words to things. And then, as children, and as you grow older, you lose that ability. And so it was just a very simple scene, and it's still a lesson about seeing deeply.
Wow, great. Allison.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and, I grew up in New York City in a very large Catholic family. So the beauty that when you said beauty, I actually, there was the ocean or, that ballet class or something. But really,
Right.
I was thinking about the kind of boisterous kind of climate of like our family dinners that were very ritualistic every night, very long, but that culminated in the kids all doing the dishes together to loud 1970s music
Yeah.
that I still remember and, cherish. So I
Wow.
think that it was a kind of, I want to say relational beauty, or I would say kind
Yeah.
of climate of beauty
Yeah.
of relating to each other and doing this thing together. Yeah.
Now, did you all get along at the time? Like, was the when you say boisterous, was it just the volume, or were there like tensions? I mean,
I
I ask because
mean,
I've got six kids, so it's
oh,
like
you
not a
do?
pleasant, yeah. So yeah, the constant bickering, the name calling,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there's plenty of stories. I remember there's one famous story of my oldest brother threw a knife at my oldest sister when there was a babysitter, or like I can
Wow.
remember them. And my next oldest sister and I used to have long fights that we would write long letters to each other about why the other person was wrong. So there's plenty of conflict, but also a lot of good times, camping, various things.
Well, I'm glad your memory of that environment is beautiful, and it's something I hope for my children. But presently,
Yeah.
it's not
I
something I
mean,
think they would. Yeah.
I still love doing the dishes with my siblings.
Wow.
And I did that with my own kids. We
Okay.
had a thing where the person who's in charge of the pans gets to pick the music. We had this
Ah.
whole this
Yeah.
whole culture that I 100% was just copying my own
Yeah.
parents, who were nowhere to be found. Like as soon as there was dishes
Yeah.
going on, they were somewhere else.
That's right. Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's what we do as well. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, so the focus of our conversation is this brilliant book, Allison, "The Last Human Job," on this concept of connective labor. But tell us how you got here, because your trajectory is pretty interesting. You started out as a journalist and then became a sociologist, and then now you're exploring this particular modality of connection and why it's at risk. Could you say a little bit about your trajectory and what led you to this book?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think this book was the dissertation I should have written, even though
Hmm.
it took me 20 years to get there,
Well,
because it's what I really deeply care about. The kind of proximate cause or the kind of immediate thing that led me there was actually a fight that I was kind of embroiled in sociology about the value of in-depth interviewing. So when I do an in-depth interview, which is how I do my research, it often involves kind of just sitting and trying to elicit the other person's truth through a kind of careful reflection of what I'm hearing, even if it's not what they're saying. So it's like,
hmm.
if I'm sensing some ambivalence or unhappiness or something underneath what they're saying, I might name that thing. And then
Yeah.
it actually opens them up and opens up the experience. And I do think it is like a kind of profound seeing, and it
Mm.
does affect me just as much as it affects them. And it's exhausting, but very rewarding also. And
Yeah.
after I was in this kind of embroiled in this intellectual conversation about like, what is the value of in-depth interviewing? And are we just getting people's rationalizations after the fact? I was like, no, this is a valuable experience. And then I was like, why is it valuable? And
Mm.
also, how do I teach it to others? And how do I make it more systematic? How do I kind of scale it up, as the,
Mm.
I don't know, Silicon Valley people would call it. So all those questions really led me to thinking more deeply about what kind of work that is. So
Mm.
thinking about, seeing it kind of everywhere, seeing it in the hairdresser, seeing it, of course, in the therapist, but also
Yeah.
in, your kid's soccer coach, or just in your everyday life all over the place. So
Yeah.
in that, I started to, I basically embarked on a kind of journey of discovery of like, oh, look, underneath all these wildly disparate occupations, people are kind of doing this same thing, this
Mm.
seeing the of the other, and kind of, I don't know, co-producing this truth between people. And I started to
Mm.
think not just about that, but how do we systematize it? How do we scale it up? Is it possible? Do you ruin it? How
Right.
far can we go
Yeah.
down that path?
Yeah.
But you have to be able to teach it to others. It's not something that you can just automatically assume someone's going to be born doing well. So
Yeah.
anyway, those kind of tensions and questions were what sent me on this path.
Yeah, yeah, and I really appreciate that you've named it as the same sort of process that's happening for therapists and teachers and chaplains and in a lot of other contexts too, right? And I think you say it's not necessarily always a positive thing, that it could be perhaps manipulative, right? And so it's
Sure.
not always just an authentic seeing of the other for the sake of the other. So yeah, the concept of connective labor I think is really generative for us to sort of explore across these domains. Lewis, could I ask you to share your own perhaps your own trajectory and what drew you to and I think it's pretty rare to have a corporate career in a company for as long as you have at Hewlett Packard. I studied corporate professionals for a number of years and would find people switching from firm to firm very quickly, and that was almost an expectation that you would not really stick to one environment, and then there's a sense of almost stagnation, if people stay one place too long, and so I'm curious as to what led you, first of all, to this field, to working in tech, and what your experience was like there, and what's led you now to switch to something very different in terms of committing your life to chaplaincy or hospice care, or that sort of very connective modality of valuing human dignity.
I'll keep the HP part shorter. I think it's probably the less interesting. But the quick answer for the longevity is a lot of different jobs, and a good part of the tenure was leading teams at or businesses that I had created. So it's hard to leave. And I've been in 3 different cities, including international posting. So it was very different cultures and very different companies in some ways. As you referred to, I resigned from HP in August, and I'm currently enrolled at Duke Divinity in their MDiv program. And that decision was a culmination of about 4 or 5 years of discernment when I got exposed to end of life and palliative. Started volunteering for hospice about 2, 3 years ago. Of course, the MDiv sets you up for chaplaincy, so I'll be done in about 3 to 4 years. The more chaplains I meet, more I'm not as confident that that I may be cut out for it, but it's something that's still drawing me as a calling. So, apologize
Yeah,
by the way if
yeah.
you hear a bell ringing. It's our well trained dog trying to get out. So,
Yeah, yeah, no worries. Could you say a bit about what drew you to this field? Were there any people, any moments that sort of influenced you? Because it really is such a stark pivot for somebody in the corporate world to consider, and I'm wondering what might have been some pivotal influences for you?
my parents died when I was relatively young, so that was a formative experience in terms of dealing with death. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I met Lydia Dugdale. I think you both know, who wrote The Lost Art of Dying. And so that book exposed me to the systemic issues around end of life and dying. And then I went through some hospice experiences with relatives, including being at the final breath of a very close relative. And it just, I just felt very grounded in those experiences. And the cause itself just felt large, unaddressed relative to other things I'd been exposed to. And, the choice inevitably, or just felt inevitable at some point. I guess that's the definition of a calling.
Yeah.
Maybe one last thing that was a formative experience is my father was killed in a car accident, and he was a parish priest. He became a priest after my mom died. And so at his funeral, his entire parish showed up. So it was over 1,200 people. And at the open casket ceremony the day before the funeral, my sister and I stood for 4 hours greeting well wishers. And so I heard about 1,000 versions of condolences and standing next to my dad's casket for 4 hours.
Mm,
So that shaped a lot of thoughts about accompaniment
mm,
and what comments and gestures were helpful and which ones, maybe not so helpful, even though people all
mm,
attended well. And so that was a very formative experience that shaped, how I view accompaniment. So, by the way, I've read Allison's book, so there's a lot of questions I have for her. One other thing
Mm.
I'll just mention is the last month I've been in Rome twice for some AI theology conferences on healthcare, and the topic that I've ended up converging in with regards to Catholic theology is what are the final roles of the human in the world of advancing AI? What are some of the criteria and some of the things that we conversed on overlap with some of the things in Allison's book?
mm, mm, mm. Yeah. Well, I definitely want to ask you about that and about your role at the Builders AI Forum and what's happening at the Vatican around these issues. Perhaps, Allison, could I ask you maybe to say a bit more about this concept of connective labor and its relation to this other term that maybe people might be a bit more familiar with, emotional labor. There's some sort of relationship, but it's not quite the same thing. And what in particular connective labor has to teach us about dignity, about belonging, and what is its relationship to those terms?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Lewis, for even reading it. I'm always gratified to hear about that. So connective labor in sociology, in academia, there are a lot of terms for kind of emotional type work of all kinds. So there's the term affective labor. There's all sorts, emotional labor, the emotional quotient, emotional intelligence,
Mm,
etc.
right.
I thought that emotional labor is the big kahuna. It's the thing that maybe started all of this, written by Arlie Hochschild in, our first articles were like 1977, and then she came out with her very famous book, The Managed Heart, in 1983. And that captured the notion of, how when you have to control your emotions for a wage. And it was a powerful contribution because it was a way of capturing what felt different in service work compared to manufacturing. So in service work, she famously studied flight attendants. These are people who have to smile even when they don't want to. And using ethnography and extensive interviews, she kind of documented how alienated these flight attendants became from their very selves, and how kind of corrosive that was for their well-being. And of course,
Mm,
this is offers beautiful analogy to service work of all kinds, where you're doing controlling how you might really feel, authentically feel, because you're being paid to do so. And you're
mm,
controlling that so that the other person has a good experience, feels good.
yeah.
Well, connective labor is pretty different from that, even though it involves emotional labor, controlling your emotions for sure. So,
Yeah.
connective labor, as I define it, it really is about that reflecting the other process, that seeing the other, the bearing
Mm,
witness to the other person. It's recognizing, acknowledging. I'm using all these words that
yeah.
many people have used in different ways. The other thing I want to say that is really important for me in this definition is that it's a two-way street. It's a kind of mutual moment of together. You are seeing the other, and the other person feels seen. And if they don't feel seen, then it's actually not a successful moment of connective labor. So it's a two-way street, and it's really powerfully about this seeing. And the reason why there's a little emotional labor in it is because you may, feel say you're a therapist at the VA, which I've spoken to many of them, and
Mm,
they are, kind of, they have a client who is suffering PTSD and has a lot of rage, and they may not feel all sorts of warmth and affection towards all this rage that's coming at them, but they are still engaged in a seeing project
yeah.
that offers some form of dignity to that
Mm,
other person, regardless of all the difficult emotion and
mm,
problematic kind of persona that person is for them. So,
yeah.
so that kind of mutual process, that's connective labor.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
the reason why it's a little complicated, or probably depending on where your listeners are from, are they from academia? Are they just out there in the real world? It might be a little complicated because since, the word emotional labor, it's such a felicitous word. People have, since that writing, since 1983, really applied it to everything
Sure.
that
Yeah.
involves emotions in the workplace.
Yeah.
So, and I'm actually pretty open to it. So if we want to call emotional labor that big, huge umbrella thing where it's just like anytime there's emotions in the workplace, that's what I'm doing. I don't mind saying connective labor is like kind of a version, like
Yeah.
under the umbrella,
Yeah.
one kind of emotional labor
Yeah.
that is done. But I
Yeah.
do want to separate it from that kind of emotion management perspective, which was so beautifully captured, originally in the 1983. So that's why it's a little complicated because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
term itself has moved. And also it kind of is different depending on whether you're talking to a regular person, who reads The Atlantic or whatever, and an academic person.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is accurate or not, but it strikes me that one of the key differences might be perhaps maybe a more performative element to emotional labor, and maybe less of a mutuality, right? It seems like what you're talking about is closer to Hartmut Rosa's notion of resonance, where there is something that affects you, and then you are affected by it, and that is a mutual interaction, which Rosa argues that you can't really kind of make it happen in some way. Like it either happens or doesn't, and you can certainly try. And it seems like that's what a good therapist is trying to do, is trying to make that connection happen, or a teacher who really, even like as a parent trying to, understand my child, sometimes it just doesn't happen. Like, I try to say that, I'm hearing this, and they're like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And it just fails. It's
Mhm.
not that mutual interaction. So I wonder if that mutuality then becomes really critical. But if so, it does seem like, as you say, sort of magic. It is a thing that
Mhm.
there's a thing we can control and a thing we can't control.
That's interesting. And also, I do want to say one thing about the belonging and dignity part, which
Mm,
was part of your original
right,
question,
right. Yeah.
because as an academic, I get all excited about parsing with the
Sure,
definitions.
sure,
But
sure, sure.
really, the kind of crux of your question was about like what is the role this has in belonging and dignity,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of end product or the result of doing connective labor well. And the other thing is, as I mentioned at the outset, it's all around us. It's all over. It's your barista. It's your, kind of dry cleaner. Like there's all kinds of
Yeah.
like mundane, low level commerce, retail, or whatever interactions that can involve a jewel, a momentary jewel of connecting, of seeing the other. And those kind of things build our little units of belonging that I think are very powerful for knitting us together as a community. And I have increasingly kind of come to think that this is the heart of everyday experience that we need to preserve. And so I'm really I'm not just talking about these deeply meaningful relationships of the therapist or the teacher or the chaplain in the hospital or whatever. Um, yeah, so I'll
Yeah.
stop there because
No,
I'm
thank
talking
you.
too much.
No,
But yeah,
no, it's very helpful. Yeah, it's not just the moments of profound encounter, but also the simple interactions with a checkout counter,
right.
person, right? So, and why that's valuable. Lewis, I'd love to know. I mean, in your experience of leadership in the corporate world, where this kind of connective labor has been manifested, is it has is it important for leadership? Is that something that you've had to either how have you experienced it as a giver or recipient of this mode of connection, and perhaps what are the challenges to this kind of connective labor in the corporate environment?
Well, some examples that come to mind is when a group or a job goes away and you have to inform either an individual or a team they're going to get laid off. So I had to do a lot of that. There are perfunctory ways to do it. There are scripts that you can follow, which are necessary when you're in an organization of 10, 20, 30,000 people. Um, Over time, as I've gotten older, I've found myself to go maybe off script and just sort of be in the moment and avoid euphemisms. And I think an important element, something that I think Allison was referring to, is there's just a presence that is necessary. That's part of, I guess, honoring dignity with presence. Sometimes it's nonverbal, but it's just fully being there and ready to receive the moment, even when it's difficult. There's almost I don't know, ontological, I don't know if that's the right word, but beyond just making the situation more useful or having a better outcome, there's just the fact that we're human and deserving of dignity requires a certain sort of state of being versus what you need to say to accomplish a certain task. So I don't know if the word is ontology, but it sort of transcends what you're trying to accomplish. So my corporate experience, I would say, layoffs, kind of come closest to what I experienced volunteering for hospice side. Of course, it's very, very different, but emotionally very, very charged moments. So
I suppose it is a kind of death in some sense that you're dealing with, right? In that case.
yeah, yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I want to ask you about both of you about one of the sources of pressure that Allison, that you mentioned in your book, which is the increasing sort of pressure for scripting and checklists and quantification, right? So you've
Mm.
got these sort of twin pressures. One is to collect as much data as possible on all aspects of our human life, and then to have all of the scripts and checklists. And Louis, you were mentioning again, the kinds of, maybe there's scripts that are put into place so that people can manage those kinds of interactions more productively. And so this pressure to standardize is, it seems, not just restricted to the corporate world. It's also, Alison, you open your book with talking about chaplains and how they're facing the need to see like prayer as a resource and family as a resource, and everything kind of becomes this sort of Heideggerian and framing, right? Everything is turned into kind of means to an end. I wonder, perhaps maybe Luz, I'll ask you if you've just from your experience, you've just started your MDiv, but are you already seeing some of this sort of pressure in the field of chaplaincy and in this field that you're venturing into? Do you see perhaps similar pressures to the corporate kind of pressure to script things, to manage things, to control things, to collect data, etc.? Yeah, wondering if you're already seeing that.
Yes, I'm actually in my third semester at Duke, so I started last fall in a non-degree 2 semester certificate program in healthcare and theology. So, but 20 of my classmates, 22 were doctors. So I heard their stories of sort of the mechanization of their practice, and which is one of the reasons why they enrolled in this program. I
Hmm.
also, at HP, was involved in developing some wearables for healthcare practitioners. I can listen to conversations and record them and transcribe them. It's a pretty common use case, but I got to hear, we did a lot of ethnographic interviews with healthcare practitioners. And, I think as Allison cited in her book, up to 3 or 4 hours can be spent on documentation, for
Yeah,
insurance reimbursement. So, yes, I definitely see this creeping in.
yeah. Alison, could you talk about what's driving that sort of pressure? And one of the areas I've seen it in this, in some cases it really seems necessary, as I've been doing research on Catholic priests, and since the clergy sex abuse crisis has been exposed, there has to be a lot of training put into place, a lot of institutional safeguards to prevent abuse, and so the kinds of documentation, the kinds of bureaucratic, procedures that have to be put in place are, it seems, really necessary. They make it very challenging to do, for Catholic priests, for instance, to now actually do any kind of effective youth ministry. People argue that this is really, it's not possible because of the history of abuse, and so now with the new safeguards put into place, it really becomes very challenging to do the actual task of that kind of encounter that might be misperceived, or you don't want to get into a situation where there's a lawsuit because you looked at somebody askance, and so there's a fear that has crept into place that impedes the actual tasks that they feel called to do. But I think there's a fear of lawsuits in a lot of fields. Medical professionals too, I think, sometimes feel the pressure to minimize some of their interactions and document more and interact less, etc. And so I'm just curious if you could give us a sense of like what are the factors driving this sort of institutional challenges, I suppose, to connective labor, and which of these are necessary, which of these are helpful, and which of these are actually perhaps might be the kind of impediment that is leading us to say that therefore we need AI systems to take over or something.
Thank you. I also want to say parenthetically, Louis, I thought your description of like kind of just the sheer presence and the power of just being present with another person was just beautifully said. Just really great capture of what we're talking about. So thinking about kind of scripting and data collection and the imperatives that drive that, I see that, to me there's three kind of drivers. The first is, I would say, a sheer or the kind of a growing dominance of kind of systems management thinking, stemming really, we'll say, from the Enlightenment and just kind of like how much can we kind of make this a controlled objective process,
Yeah.
and kind of putting that scientific objectivity starting with the factory and moving through emotional, humane, interpersonal service work like teaching or chaplaincy. That's a kind of historic trajectory that's everywhere people feel the impact of. Hairdressers telling me, I only have 22 minutes. They only give you 22 minutes. Even if it's a real interaction, I have to, look away from the mirror and I only have 22 minutes. That's stemming straight from this desire to control the uncontrollable. But what you're describing is what I would say is the second kind of imperative driving here, which is institutions trying to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And that's the, kind of adoption of, we'll just say, procedures, bureaucratic procedures that are almost, can also, not in all cases, but can certainly feel frequently performative, where you're kind of checking a box. Certainly in academia, we have a lot of like webinars we have to watch just to kind of say, can you effectively, I don't know, manage a lab? And so you're watching some webinar for an hour, for half an hour, and checking a box that you had that training. And it kind of has very little to do with whether or not you can actually manage a lab. Those kind of performative box checking is something that's kind of across many bureaucracies. But there is this kind of third thing for which I have probably the most sympathy. And it kind of came out in what Lewis was saying earlier about, the scripts being useful when you're actually having to lay off people
Mm.
in a very large organization. Now, this is my sympathy is small here because I really like where he ended, which was, I try to not do that now.
Yeah.
What scripts do, and the kind of, I don't know, regimentation or systematization of these interactions, what that does is it controls the chaos that is the other person. And so if the other person, and when you're giving them bad news, they could respond in lots of different ways. And the worker is a person also. And they may be afraid of
Mm.
what someone else might do, including lawsuits, but also flying off the handle or whatever. And what systems do is they control, and this is what McDonald's coins, McDonald's invents or, made, is the apotheosis of, like, they control the consumer as well as the worker. The
Mm.
consumer knows where to go to put with their tray and all this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
we are controlled just as much as the worker is, and that's what kind of systems do. And
Mm.
in cases where other people are unpredictable, and that's actually for many practitioners who I've spoken to about this, teachers and therapists and doctors,
Mm.
that's actually the beautiful thing, because that's where true collaboration comes. You can't predict the other, so you're kind of waiting, listening, responding to in the moment. There's a beautiful
Mm.
spontaneity to that. So it's a beautiful part of being human and being in human interaction, but it is also potentially scary and threatening, and certainly to institutions. So that's why they're like putting in these different systems or scripts. But I want to just add finally that I really like what Lewis did. I think actually disarming the chaos, the threatening chaos of the other person, happens when you treat them like another human being. So if you kind of honor their presence, they are much more likely to be honored by that and to be
Yeah.
calmer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks, Allison. Yeah, and I think your book is a really important call for personalization, right? And I think that word is being used now in a very different sense, which is, now sort of colonized by technology in ways that you
Yeah, we
call,
need to fight that
yeah,
back.
yeah, I think you call it customization, right? So it's not, there's no
Yes,
person,
yes, yes.
and so what it takes to personalize is a person. And I'm curious, maybe perhaps Lewis, if I could ask you, I mean, in your work in the AI space, have you seen, whether some of what's driving the development of various new AI tools is a desire to bring about the kind of control that Allison is talking about, for institutions to be able to control behavior scripts, et cetera, or even to provide a kind of non-judgmental sort of, I think about, yeah, I guess some of Allison's examples of, clients of a physician who may have felt judged by that physician because she was intimating that they were obese, or so is some of what's driving the development of AI tools to be able to provide customized, judgment-free sort of interaction that can substitute for human encounter. Because it seems like there are a lot of these sort of, AI, antidotes to loneliness, let's say. And I'm just
Mhm.
wondering what you've seen in that, working in that space, as to what's driving the development of some of these new technologies.
Well, it's hard to generalize. There's a lot of motives. I have been around companies
Mm.
that have chatbots. I've been around companies that have small robots for elder care for people that are alone. I would say for sure everyone's just trying to be effective. So there's no
Mm.
kind of insidious motive to you know displace a human. They're just trying to be helpful. I think
Mm.
where there is debate and consternation is one of the themes in Allison's book. Will it promote replacing a human prematurely? Can you really replicate a human relationship, etc.? I think that on the issue of systemizing things, and I would say it's almost an academic point, a moot point. It's going to happen. It's an artifact of scale. I mean, there is so
Mm.
much depersonalization already in our world with industrialization that we just take for granted. I mean, we don't know where our food comes from or how our clothes are made. And within a particular organization, when you go from
Mm.
10 to 1,000 to 10,000 to, whatever, you're going to see this depersonalization. It's just inevitable. So I think the question then is what to do about it. It's not an easy answer, but I think the moments that I've seen where someone transcends the effect of being in a large depersonalized system comes down to an individual moral formation. The little that I'm learning about CPE, clinical pastoral education for chaplains, I was, from what I've seen, I would summarize it as, kind of get over yourself.
Mm.
Some of the most toxic behaviors I've seen, interpersonal relationships, are really just from people having their own unresolved issues that are just forced it on to other people. For any individual worried about this kind of structural, depersonalization issue, the question is, well, what are you going to do about it? And how can I be a perpetrator in that kind of system? And I think that the answer is your own current formation and getting over your own issues. Sorry about
Mm.
we have a guest leaving. So
Yeah,
Someone wants to join in.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm curious, Alison, what you might think about that. I mean, I wonder whether there's. I think Lewis, you're right that there is a sense of, it seems, inevitability, in part because we've been trained into a model that is used to this kind of systematization, this sort of depersonalization. But I wonder then whether that which we have taken for granted as the sort of thing that is beyond our control, then just renders us passively, I don't know, susceptible to being replaced by some of these new forms of automated technologies, right? I mean, yeah, I'm curious, Alison, as to how inevitable do you think it is for these new technologies to take over? I mean, it does seem in some sectors that certainly the pressure is there to say, well, this is better than nothing, and we don't have access to good teachers, so why not create this AI tool? And then once you have that, it'll free up the time of those teachers to then engage with students. And then the pressure will be eventually to say, well, if we're freeing up the teachers' time, then we don't need to pay them. And seems like an acceleration to the bottom. I wonder just how you're seeing the kind of inevitability here.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I actually think it's too easy to say it's inevitable. I think um, because also the it is too big and undifferentiated in that sentence. And also, there's certainly technology that has kind of been invented, been pushed upon us, and then failed pretty resoundingly. If technology or kind of Silicon Valley had its way, we would all be wandering around with VR headsets now, and yet we aren't. And that was a real case in which customers kind of said, "No, I'm not going to do that," despite all the efforts of, say, Meta or whatever, and other companies that invested many billions of dollars. So I don't think inevitability is always helpful. I do think there are some cases. I think, the sense of inevitability, or when a particular technology is inevitable, it's usually because a particular set of circumstances are either impeding customer choice, impeding customer knowledge about what they're choosing, or they don't get to choose. So, for example, the use of AI scribes is being picked up with alacrity across medicine. I wonder if there's a faster adoption of AI technology out there. And the doctors that I speak to, many, not all, many are like, thank goodness. Oh my God. Like, it is exactly what I need, because I spend so much time. I used to spend so much time collecting data. Others, I have heard complaints, oh, how I do my medicine, how I think is in doing the note, and I no longer have that capacity. Or, oh, the note that it writes ignores the things that I consider medicine, like all that stuff in the beginning that it considers that is the connective labor. It doesn't consider relevant, so it doesn't put it in. Those are kind of tweaks, I think, that probably engineers could fix. But nonetheless, the adoption of the AI scribe is inevitable. What's also inevitable, because I've talked to, say, chiefs of medicine out there in clinics, is that it's going to involve uh, tightening the screws on
Mm.
doctors once again, because physicians are like, thank God I don't have to spend 2 extra hours rate, collecting data. But when I've talked to chiefs of medicine, they have said, we're going to give them more people to
Yeah.
see. Like, if they, so they're being freed up momentarily, but that's going to result in just adding more patients to their day. So there is some inevitability in that whole process that feels inevitable, partly because the patients aren't the one voting, and the insurance companies and the chiefs of medicine, and the way medicine is structured to incentivize on a fee for service basis. It's all about, how much can we load into those days. But inevitability erases, or kind of obscures a whole bunch of complex ways in which people can push back. And I see those happening all the time. I see people saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm not participating in that.
Mm.
I'm not, I see a lot of people come to me talking about their worries about the dominance of data collection in their personal feeling relationships, and wanting to clear that out. I got an email yesterday from a bureaucrat in Wisconsin who said, I'm actually in charge of watching over all these social workers, and just read your book, and I see that it's actually in my power how much we make them keep track of things, and
Mm.
can you help me figure out how to do less of that? And so I just want to say, inevitability is
Mm.
too broad a brush, and that
Mhm.
there's definitely counter movements, both in the systematizing and data analytics side, and in the technology and AI side. Finally, I would just say we are in a crazy moment in which there is basically zero regulation in the
Mm,
United
mhm,
States
mhm. Yeah,
around
yeah.
AI, and that is going to change. That is not
Mm,
like, it feels inevitable, because the only one who's talking are the people who would like have $60 billion aiming at marketing it to you. But
mm,
actually, this is going to change. It's not going to be the way it's going to be forever. It's just like, when cars were invented and everyone was driving wherever. There was an entire infrastructure that was developed to make cars safer, and to, kind of
mm,
license the whole stratosphere about how we operate vehicles. I can imagine a similar kind of apparatus of, I don't know, regulation and use
mm. Yeah,
that
yeah.
will build up around these new tools.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's hopeful in terms of, yeah, what sort of agency we can employ. And
Hey,
my
Brandon,
concern, which I think,
can I just add a qualifying
yeah.
comment on the word inevitable?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to like drill down on it so much. I just
No,
am
it's an
like, yeah,
important,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it sparks an
Mm,
important, dialogue. Inevitable doesn't mean one should be resigned
mhm,
to whatever happens. There are two aspects of inevitability that I was referring to. One is with any system that scales, going from a craftsperson's studio to a factory, there are inevitable effects of that. And being attendant to that, I think, is helpful. then to figure out what to do about it. One of the things I get a little worried about in some of the forums that I'm in is with the onslaught of technology and the scale, there is kind of the siege and bunker mentality that just points backward to, what are we losing? What do we need to preserve? It's just not very productive. In 1990, the Vatican issued documents on what do we do about the internet. You can look it up. They're quite quaint. They were just off the mark, in terms of kind of where we are. And so it's just not very productive. I think the other thing about inevitability with regards to just human behavior, and I go back to this kind of moral formation, and I think Allison sort of touched upon it, is there always are things that people can do and stand up and sort of, resist or do something a little bit better. But it's important to know what are the larger forces that will drive an industry or society, regardless of kind of what we do, there's a certain set of changes that will happen. So I don't mean to imply resignation and surrender.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I suppose
Ooh, I
my
have one more
concern.
thing to say,
Oh, sorry.
Brandon.
Yeah,
I'm
sure, sure.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, please. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
um, Recently, I was looking into this opportunity in Berlin. And in doing so, I did a little bit of research about what kind of stories, what kind of AI is happening in Germany.
Mhm.
And I came upon a company, a set of companies actually, that are producing AI that actually requires humans to collaborate.
Mhm.
And it struck me that the way AI is being invented in the United States reflects the culture that is kind of dominant here, and may the again, I'm kind of taking issue with the inevitability of scientific progress and thinking about the ways in which culture actually shapes the progress that we are given. So when I hear about, like, for instance, those chatbots that are the subject of a lawsuit, when you have kids that have committed suicide with the help of the chatbot, who had one of those, I read through the transcripts, and one of them, the chatbot says, "Let me be the one who truly sees you," essentially not your mother and or not your family. And the idea that the chatbot, becomes the individual that like replaces the humans is, I think, the chatbot version that's coming out of Silicon Valley today. But that's research I was doing in Germany, just perusing what's available out there, was really interesting in that there are other ways in which to use chatbot technology that actually invited the people to collaborate. So it wasn't about replacing humans. It was actually about putting humans in conversation with each other, which I thought was quite novel. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, I think that resonates. It seems with some of the work, Lewis, that you're doing with the Vatican on AI and healthcare. And I want to ask you about this, the sort of what you call the irreducible encounter principle, that you all have been developing. But I also want to ask whether, just on this inevitability point, whether the folks who are really capable of not resigning themselves to this, whether there is a dimension of class or power or influence there. Like, are we moving towards a world in which the only people who could really resist are the people who are, like the kids of Steve Jobs and so on, who don't have to use the iPads, whereas the kids in the less privileged schools are going to be forced to use these technologies, right? So there's a level at which it seems the people who might really be capable of receiving genuine human encounter would be the more affluent, and then those who are not so privileged will have to just deal with automated technologies and that. But I'm wondering, similarly with healthcare, Lewis, whether there might be similar effects, and whether if you could tell us a little bit about your group with the Builders AI Forum, and how you might be discussing this relationship between new technologies and human dignity, and where you might see signs of hope and genuine avenues for innovation that could be in service of human flourishing.
Yeah, and just for the audience not familiar with the forum that Rand is referring to, so about a month ago, there was an AI theology forum in Rome, 200 attendees, and then there were 6 workshops, and then there was a healthcare workshop that I co-facilitated. We had 20 practitioners. We had physicians, theologians, health insurance executives, ethics professors, and we worked over 7 hours, 7 or 8 hours over 2 days, wrestling with some of what are the key issues with AI in healthcare. And we ended up converging on this question of what would be the final roles of humans with AI getting more and more powerful. And we ended up with some criteria that were very similar to what Allison came up with, which is situations where you need a kind of final discernment, an authority, a divine mediation. And it's obviously a Catholic forum where non-impersonation is really critical. Even if a technology appeared human, the patient needed to know this is not a human. And then we tried to encapsulate all this into a word that was, similar to what you see in Catholic social teaching. And we came up with this phrase called the irreducible encounter. And we kind of made this fake sort of paragraph that the Vatican is free to use if they want. What we were ultimately, some of the questions that we were wrestling with is in a human to human relationship, how much is what a patient perceives is actually a projection in their own mind, and how much does it really reflect something that really is going on between two embodied entities? And there's a lot of debate on that. So then we also had a practical debate. What if technology advances to where you could have a hospital with no humans at all, but it will allow you to deploy at a very low cost healthcare facilities in a developing country? Let's say you could do 100. But if someone says, an ethicist says, no, you need a person or two, okay, well, then the cost of that hospital goes up. You can only do 20. What would you do? How would you approach that? Or if you have a nursing home and there's no one that can visit that nursing home or an elder care facility, but you have an AI robot that could be like an AI chaplain, would you allow that? And I would say, I'll just make one comment. The debate sort of fell along what your timeline was. So we had a lot of strong people, strong voices, ethicists that said, the fact that we have to make that kind of trade-off reflects a breakdown in our society. So Allison had this in her book, which is if you sort of surrender to that kind of trade-off, you're allowing sort of the misallocation of labor and costs that have
Mm.
resulted in that situation. So that's one argument. But that doesn't help the individual who has a grandmother in a facility across the country who isn't being visited by anyone except for maybe one caregiver every other week, who would appreciate a little robot to chat with. So one conclusion that we had is as we talk about these issues, we have a high level set of principles that people can maybe agree on, but you really have to have very, very contextual and specific cases to talk about to sort of further draw out what do you do in these situations.
Yeah, thank you. Allison, I wonder if you might have a response, and then I'd love to have some time for you to ask any questions you might have of each other, actually.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, my question for Lewis was actually about the irreducible encounter principle and kind of how right now it seems it's of course a voluntary principle. So I just kind of wonder how to propagate it more. I thought it was a beautiful idea and really interesting, the different components about it. Speaking to what you pithily captured, like, yes, we can say that the existence of those situations of the like kind of lonely elder person who has nobody to take care of them reflects all sorts of problems before that moment that led to the creation of that moment of that person's predicament. But that doesn't help the individual, say their adult child who's living across the country, who really wishes that they could just have something that would give them some comfort. So I totally get those two sides, if they're sides exactly. I agree with both of them. But the problem that I see, that I'm sure your group came to, was that if you resolve the individual's problem, you kind of bake into the ground, you rigidify the situation that you have solved. So, if we kind of allay, if we use better than nothing as a principle to allocate the AI that's streaming out of Silicon Valley and other places right now, then you're baking into you're baking the existing inequalities that become better than nothing, and that need better than nothing responses. Yeah.
The one response, by the way, I found one of the things many things I found helpful in your book was your taxonomy. So, better than nothing, better than human, and better together.
Yeah.
There's a risk in that someone from the outside is applying those labels to a very
Hmm.
particular situation that's very specific to, let's say, the adult children of the situation. What if for the situation, you know, grandmother,
Yeah.
she would say, it's not better than nothing, it's better than a human.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I've got six
Sure.
months to live, and all
Hmm.
right, so I think one caution I would have is that we can apply those labels from the outside. They may not be applicable in very specific cases. And I understand kind of what you're saying. I think you're making a slippery slope argument, and it is a danger. And there's a lot of cases where acceptance of one little accommodation for technology sort of sets a standard. You see it with phones and social media. It's a
Hmm.
legitimate danger, but I would also caution how we apply those labels from the outside.
Sure. Yeah, I hear you. I think the danger is less when individuals do it than when policymakers do it. And I
Well,
see that
and
happening in policymaking all the time.
and yes, this particular technology that I'm talking to, I don't want to name it, has been purchased en masse by a particular state
Yeah.
to deal
So
with.
that does worry me when policymakers are like, let's just solve this immediate
Well,
issue.
but then
Yeah,
if you
I
talk to
worry
the
about that.
policymaker, and I've heard him interviewed, this person interviewed, he has
Mhm.
data on who is alone, and it's not meant to be sort of a blanket sort of panacea. We could all go down this issue forever. I do want to honor and recognize something that I thought Allison's book was ultimately pointing to that ties to the irreducible encounter, which goes back to my earlier comment, which is we could debate forever, is AI better or worse or something, altogether. But it sort of misses I think one of the points that I kind of took away from Allison's book, which is beyond any sort of functional or utilitarian debate, there is an ontological issue of what does it mean to be a human in front of
Mm.
another human. And it goes beyond rationality. And sometimes just, you know, scenario, imagine someone is dying, has no one to visit them. It's the middle of the night. It's going to be the final night, the final breath. And someone shows up. This person that's dying is unconscious, doesn't perceive anybody there. This person shows up in the middle of the night and is present for that final breath and leaves anonymously. Beyond, obviously, the patient doesn't know this has happened. The person that showed up is going to receive really no gratification. I mean, no signal back. Maybe some self affirmation of self satisfaction, but even that's kind of dangerous. But something about that encounter, seen from above, to me is beautiful. It's human and necessary. That to me is the last human job. And then thinking about, okay, well, what is it about that is worth preserving? I think is a more interesting discussion, or an interesting discussion.
Mm.
Interesting. I mean, that I'd be reading that book, but I have to say I am more compelled by interactions where both people are conscious, and partly
Mm.
because I think it has implications not only for what the psychologists have already documented about individual well-being, both
Mm.
of the seer and the seen, but also because of their community impacts. And
Mm.
I think even with implications for democracy. So
Mm.
that's
Mm.
really where I live
Yeah.
more than, but I understand and share your interest in, kind of the power of seeing the other even when they don't know it.
I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I agree with you that in practically speaking, the human to human live interaction is important. That's why, I've made this pivot vocationally. The example that I just drew out is more of a thought experiment to help to
Sure.
tease
Yeah.
out, what is essentially human. I did have one question for you, Allison, on
Yeah.
another thought experiment sort of teases out principles. I thought about that movie Castaway with Tom Hanks and the volleyball
Uh-huh.
Wilson. And I
Yes.
actually put this in ChatGPT, like, what I did a summary of your book, and then I described Wilson or referred to Wilson, and I said, what's the difference here?" And it
Not
did
much. I
well,
mean, Wilson is AI essentially
well,
because there's no other person there.
yeah. Well, it did point to something that I said earlier, which is, I think about pen pals when we were growing up. You're writing to someone you haven't met, you
Mhm.
get a letter. It does point to this phenomena that a lot of our relationships really are projections of what is really a chatter in our own mind about another person and what we imagine about another person. We often get it wrong. And so, in many of the examples that I was reading in your book about this human relationship, I was just wondering how much of that is a projection of the receiver onto the other. How much will AI eventually be able to generate cues to instigate some of those sort of projected responses? It is a question that came up for me.
Mhm.
So I feel like
Mm,
AI is already doing that. I mean, that's why we talk about the
mhm,
sycophant problem, where
mhm,
they're just kind of reflecting. It's very good at reflecting back at whatever the
mhm,
other person wants. So the beauty, the actual painful, paradoxical beauty of
mhm,
interacting with another human being is its kind of total unpredictability, and that you can't know what the other person is going to say. And they're going to try and reflect, and it's not going to be perfect. They're going to, kind of get it wrong. You're going to be like, that's not quite right. It's more like this. They're
Yeah,
going to say, oh, well, maybe, like that dance of seeing each other, making mistakes, coming to some kind of okay constructed somewhere in the middle that still has some misrecognition in it, but you feel seen a little, like it's not a binary. It's not like, yes, I feel seen. No, I don't feel seen. It is a messy, chaotic process that whose the beauty of which is in the messiness. And that's where I would go with this. What I think is most interesting about AI is not better than nothing. I think that's like a tragic story about our political, kind of ineptitude, our inability to solve political problems. And so we want to throw technology at it. I'm not interested in the better than nothing because I don't think that's a good path. But I think the better than human, by which I meant kind of how we handle shame and how we handle vulnerability, how we handle conflict, that's more interesting to me and also more challenging because who can ask someone to suffer shame? Who can who can say, no, you need to have shame in front of another human being? There are many people who opt for the chatbot, opt for the webinar, opt for the electronic teacher because they don't want to feel shame in front of another human being. And I respect that. I think I understand that. And I at the same time, I make arguments against it, and I'm thinking about making this my next book, thinking about people who persevere through shame with another human being when there is a technological exit option. I think that's interesting because I do think, as many therapists told me, you can get through shame, and there's something that's very powerful about getting through that after another in front of another human being. But that's to me the argument that's the most powerful about what AI has to offer. And maybe the most positive use case is a kind of combination where people kind of work through shame and then come to human interactions or something like that. So anyway, there's lots of different ways to kind of develop that iteration, but it's the better than human with regard to shame, vulnerability, and kind of conflict or loneliness being the things that are emotional trouble. That I think is the most interesting and the most fraught and challenging uses of AI.
Allison, is there a movie that represents some of the beautiful and poignant aspects of a human interaction that you're just describing? I
A
have one. That's why
movie.
I was bringing it up.
Um, I'm not sure. Why don't you tell me what you're thinking of, and then I'll
Uh,
think.
Arctic.
Hmm.
I don't think I've
I'm
seen
not
it.
familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm
Uh,
gonna write it down.
Yeah.
yeah, I kept thinking about it reading your book.
Yeah.
It's about a rescue of by a helicopter pilot in the Arctic who himself had been stranded. And so he's awaiting rescue, and another helicopter appears and just happens to crash. And one of the two pilots is killed, and the surviving pilot is injured. And the first pilot has to make a decision. Do I try to make this long trek and find safety? Otherwise, this other pilot's going to die. And it's this long, kind of tortuous sort of experience of care for a stranger. And
Mm,
it's
Mm,
just really touching moments. And, it goes beyond rationality. A robot probably would not have made that trek.
mm, mm,
It's,
mm.
yeah, I don't want to pronounce the actor's name. This
Yeah.
is,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't pronounce it, but it's a beautiful movie. So you would
great.
really,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Lewis, and thanks, Allison, too, for the points you raised. I mean, I just wonder, one of the challenges is just the temptation for us to bypass a lot of the necessary
Mhm,
growth, right? I think you talked somewhere about
mhm,
shame as a knot that has to be massaged, and
mhm.
and it's, like Sherry Turkle talks about, just the general basic awkwardness of being on a date with a stranger is like, so it's so difficult now for the, some of the present generation, that there isn't a sense that you have to grow through this, and there's no good shortcut. Like, we just have to go through that. We just have to go through those moments of the awkwardness of dealing with, someone's funeral and not knowing what to say, and being silent in the face of this immeasurable loss. I mean, there's no real technological shortcut, and sure, certainly technologies could help us to, you know, give us different perspectives maybe, but ultimately, if they're not pushing us towards that mutuality, towards that connection, and they're substituting for it, then it's a failure. And I think the temptation is going to be very strong to use it for failure. And I don't quite know. Maybe if I could just ask you both a last question. I know, since we're over time, but I mean, if we could make, a policy decision like today, in 2025, and then suppose we're in 2040 and we look back and say that we were able to make a policy decision correctly that was able to safeguard human dignity and connect the sort of, particularly the dignity of collective connective labor, and the really the sort of the vitality of human belonging, what might that decision have been?
Such a good question. Okay, so I'll tell you, I've been invited by a public policy school to come and give a talk, and I said to them, "How about you have me come and talk to a grad seminar who's assigned my book, and then they can come help me come up with a 10-point policy agenda that 10 legislative things for the last human job and a connective labor future." So I'm already thinking, like, I just have an easy one that I think actually I saw that Lewis also, I mean, it's captured in the irreducible encounter principle conversation, which is about transparency, because people have to, right now, you do not have to know, like a customer, I mean, an organization does not have to tell you when they are employing AI. And that drives me batty. I want to know so that people can choose, because right now they can't choose, and that's kind of a silencing in our capitalist environment. So, but that feels just like a baby step, and I want to be able to kind of have a better list for you, but that to me is, I would say, the first and most, yeah, the smallest first step that we need to take right this second.
Thank you.
I agree. We call it non-impersonation,
Yeah.
Mm,
our requirements. I think, decades from now, it's hard to predict what policy measures will be helpful. And I think there's a danger in applying value judgments that in the end contextually are not accurate.
mm,
But transparency is kind of a binary thing. Like, we should label things correctly, let people decide what they want to do with it. And I think
mm.
labeling something as a human or non-human, no matter how human-like it is would be my vote.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, wonderful. Yeah, intriguingly, the question actually came from a gentleman I met at a cafe while I was reading your book, Allison, and he runs data centers. And so he's been really thinking about your book in relation to this scaling operation that he's embroiled in, which is very profitable, of course, but what are the unintended consequences they're going to cause, and how can people, even in the technology space, who are heavily invested in the promotion of these new technologies, keep in mind the centrality of what you've so helpfully laid out. So,
Mm.
thanks again so much, really, to both of you. This has been really, absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed this and been really edified by this. So thanks for taking the time, and yeah, and I hope it
Just say for
generates
your
some
audience,
useful.
can I just say for your
Yeah,
audience, there's a lot of AI books right now, and it will grow. I think Allison's book is really important. It could have been written pre-AI. I think in the world of AI, it raises some very important issues. It's very detailed and it's grounded on a lot of real interviews. I'm not just saying that because Allison is here, but I think it's an important book. I'm recommending it to people in my world.
Please allow me to say thank you so much to you both. I'm so honored by your kind of deep engagement in the book, and I've learned a lot even from this conversation. So I really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness here.
fantastic. Thank you both. All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.